Nora Whitaker stood in the darkened farmhouse, shotgun in hand, watching headlights flicker at the edge of her property. They were black SUVs creeping through the shadows like wolves stalking prey. They didn't know who they were dealing with. To them, she was just a frail, elderly woman. But beneath the surface lay decades of experience in battles most would never hear about. Tonight the cartel was testing her resolve. She'd give them an answer they wouldn't forget. Trouble was coming, and Nora was ready for it. Drop a comment and share where you're joining us from. If stories like this resonate with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey coming tomorrow. Nora Whitaker clutched the shotgun firmly, her sharp eyes scanning the dark horizon. The headlights of an unfamiliar SUV flickered through the dense trees lining the back edge of her farm. The distant hum of the engine reached her ears, low and persistent, like a predator circling its prey. It was well past midnight, and the stillness of the borderlands magnified every sound. From where she stood near the weathered barn, she could sense movement, careful, deliberate steps crunching faintly over the dry earth. She didn't panic. At 95, Nora knew panic was the enemy. She took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. The SUV's lights vanished, plunging the farm back into darkness. For a few seconds, all was silent. Then, just as quickly as the threat had appeared, the engine roared to life and retreated, tires kicking up a trail of dust as it sped off into the night. Nora lowered the shotgun, her face calm but her mind racing. They weren't ready to make a move yet, but they were watching. The next morning, sunlight bathed Nora's farm in golden hues. It was a peaceful landscape, deceptively serene. Cattle wandered lazily across the pasture, and rows of pecan trees stretched toward the horizon. From the porch of her modest farmhouse, Nora could see it all. She sipped from a steaming cup of coffee, savoring the quiet morning. But even as she went through her usual routine, the events of the previous night weighed heavily on her mind. Something was coming. She had seen this pattern before in different places, during different conflicts. Quiet observation, followed by subtle intimidation, and finally, escalation. The men in the SUV were just the beginning. After finishing her coffee, Nora slipped on her wide-brimmed hat and headed toward the barn. Her steps were slow but steady, her boots crunching on the dirt path. At first glance, she appeared to be an ordinary elderly woman, her frame slightly stooped with age, but appearances were deceptive. Beneath her calm exterior lay the instincts of a seasoned intelligence operativa woman who had once outmaneuvered some of the most dangerous men in the world. The livestock stirred as she approached, familiar with her presence. Nora inspected each pen and paddock, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. She noted the tracks near the edge of the proper fresh tire marks leading toward the main road. They hadn't been there the previous day. Whoever had come last night wanted her to know they were there, but they didn't expect her to read their message so clearly. Amateurs, she muttered under her breath. Cartels had become bolder in recent years, especially near the border. She had heard rumors in townmen in black SUVs visiting isolated properties, offering deals to buy land under vague threats. But this was her land, and she wasn't about to give it up without a fight. Later that morning, Nora drove her old pickup truck into Val Vista, the small town about 20 miles from her farm. The town hadn't changed much over the decades. The general store still stood at the center of Main Street, its sign faded but sturdy. The diner next door was already bustling with regulars, and the gas station's rusted sign swung gently in the breeze. As Nora filled her tank at the station, Tommy, the young attendant, approached her. He was in his early 20s, eager but nervous. "Hey, Miss Whitaker," he greeted her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You, had some visitors last night?" Nora raised an eyebrow. "You could say that. Why do you ask?" "Some guys were here earlier this week. Black SUVs. They were asking about your place. Didn't say much. Just asked if you were planning to sell." Nora nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place. "What did you tell them?" "Just that you've lived out there forever, and don't take kindly to strangers poking around." A small smile tugged at the corner of Nora's mouth. "Good answer. Tommy hesitated, glancing around nervously before lowering his voice. You think they're serious? About taking your land, I mean? Nora met his gaze, her expression unreadable. They're serious about something. But don't worry, Tommy. I've dealt with worse. The young man gave a weak chuckle. I believe you, Miss Whitaker. Just be careful, okay? I always am, she assured him, climbing back into her truck. As she drove away from the gas station, her mind shifted to strategy. The cartler, whoever these men were, had underestimated her. They saw a vulnerable elderly widow on a remote farm, but they didn't know who she really was or what she was capable of. She had spent her entire life outthinking enemies far more dangerous than them. The road stretched ahead, flanked by open fields and distant hills. Nora tightened her grip on the steering wheel. If they thought they could intimidate her, they were about to learn a hard lesson. The storm was coming, but Nora Whitaker was ready. The general store was buzzing with its usual crowd of locals, exchanging gossip and picking up supplies. Nora Whitaker entered quietly, the screen door creaking shut behind her. She scanned the room as she made her way to the counter where Martha, the store's owner, was organizing a shipment of canned goods. Nora, Martha greeted warmly. You're out and about early today. Thought I'd stock up on a few things. Nora replied, her tone casual. How's business? Same as always. Though I had some visitors yesterday, Martha said, her voice lowering. Men I didn't recognize. Drove up in one of those fancy SUVs. Nora's interest sharpened, though she didn't show it. SUVs, you say? Yep. Said they were from a development company out of El Paso, looking to invest in local properties. Asked a lot of questions about you specifically. Martha's eyes narrowed with concern. Seemed too curious for my liking. As if on cue, the store's door swung open again, and two men entered. The taller of the two, Carlos Vega, wore an expensive suit that didn't match the rustic surroundings. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Nora almost immediately. His companion, a heavy-set man in a leather jacket, stood close behind him, surveying the store with quiet menace. Nora Whitaker? Carlos asked, stepping forward with a forced smile. Nora didn't flinch. She turned slowly, giving him a long, appraising look. Depends on who's asking. Carlos Vega, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Nora didn't take it. I represent a company interested in land acquisitions in this area. We understand you own a sizable piece of property on the outskirts of town. Nora crossed her arms, her gaze steady. I'm familiar with the type. You come in, promise big developments, and before we know it, the whole town's overrun. Thanks, but I'm not interested. Carlos chuckled, the sound hollow. Miss Whitaker, you misunderstand. We're offering a fair price well above market value. Think of what that money could do for you in your later years. Later years, Nora repeated dryly. I'm doing just fine, thank you. Carlos's smile faded slightly. He glanced at his companion, then back at Nora. Perhaps you should reconsider. Our employer, Victor Salazar, prefers smooth negotiations. We'd hate for things to become complicated. Victor El Coyote Salazar, Nora said, emphasizing the nickname with a knowing tone. Carlos stiffened, his mask of politeness slipping. Nora stepped closer, her voice low but firm. You tell your boss I don't scare easily, and I don't take kindly to threats subtle or otherwise. For a moment there was silence. The tension was palpable, drawing the attention of a few customers nearby. Carlos cleared his throat, regaining his composure. We'll be in touch, Miss Whitaker. Not if I see you first, Nora replied, turning her back on them without another word. The men left the store, the door slamming behind them. Martha watched them leave and shook her head. They don't know who they're dealing with, do they? No, Nora said softly, her eyes narrowing. But they will. Nora Whitaker sat at her oak desk in the farmhouse study, a relic from decades past. The room was lined with books and old maps, remnants of a life spent strategizing in shadows few knew existed. The faint hum of her encrypted landline filled the quiet space as she dialed a long, familiar number. After a few rings, a voice answered, Turner. Maggie, it's Nora. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle on the other end. Nora Whitaker. It's been too long. When was the last time Berlin? Or was it Cairo? Berlin, Nora confirmed. And, unfortunately, I'm not calling to catch up. I've got a situation down here. Cartel. They're pressuring me for my land. They've already started sending their goons around town. Maggie's tone hardened. You've got cartel problems? That's serious. Are they just posturing or making a real play? They're testing the waters. But I've seen this before. They'll escalate if they think I'm an easy target. I need eyes and ears people who can move without being noticed. Say no more. I'll be on the next flight out, Maggie replied. I can still handle field work. And I've got a contact in Austin who can get us access to border surveillance intel. What about Harper? Have you reached out to him? He's next on my list, Nora said. See you soon. Nora hung up and took a deep breath before dialing David Harper's number. It rang once before a deep voice answered. Harper here. David, it's Nora. A brief silence followed. Well, this is a surprise. I figured you retired from all this. I thought I had. But life has other plans, Nora said, her tone dry. I'm facing cartel trouble. They want my land, and they're not taking no for an answer. I need backup. David's voice became serious. Cartel? You sure it's not just a local gang trying to flex? Number, it's Victor Salazar's group. They sent a representative to negotiate. If they can't intimidate me, they'll move to force. Salazar? That's a name I haven't heard in years, David muttered. You're right to call. I'll bring a few trusted people, former operatives who won't ask questions. We'll keep things low. Key. Good. We're going to need a solid plan, Nora said. You've got it. We'll be there soon. Stay sharp. As the line went dead, Nora leaned back in her chair. The pieces were falling into place, but she knew this was only the beginning. The men threatening her had no idea who they were dealing with or the network of professionals she could summon at a moment's notice. The storm was gathering, and Nora was ready to meet it head-on. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The tension in Val Vista simmered beneath the surface like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Word of the cartel's presence spread quickly. Businesses that never locked their doors were suddenly reinforcing windows and installing security cameras. Rumors of menacing visits by cartel enforcers circulated. An accidental fire at the mechanic's garage, slashed tires at the hardware store, and a shattered window at the local bank. Nora Whitaker parked her truck in front of Clara's diner. The morning rush had thinned out, but a few regulars lingered at the counter. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. Clara Martinez wiped down the counter as Nora approached. Morning, Nora. Clara greeted with a weary smile. You here for coffee or information? Both, Nora replied, sliding onto a stool. I heard some things. Wanted to see how much of it's true. Clara set a mug of coffee in front of her. It's bad. Those men cartel, I assume, have been busy. They came by last night asking if I was interested in protection. Her expression darkened. They didn't take it well when I told them to shove it. Did they do anything? Nora asked. Her voice calm but edged with concern. Not directly, but someone smashed the back window right after they left, Clara said. Could have been a coincidence, but I doubt it. They want us scared, Nora. They're testing how much pushback they'll get. They'll find out soon enough, Nora replied, taking a sip of coffee. This town's tougher than it looks. Maybe, Clara said softly. But not everyone's willing to take that risk. You know how people are when fear takes hold. Some will fight back, others will cave. Nora nodded. Fear was a powerful weapon, one the cartel wielded with precision. It could fracture a community faster than any physical attack. We need to make sure they know we're united. They'll lose interest if they think the whole town is ready to stand up to them. Clara folded her arms. You've always been the quiet type, but I get the feeling there's more to you than most people know. You planning something? Let's just say I've seen this kind of trouble before, Nora answered, her eyes narrowing. And I know how to handle it. Clara chuckled softly. Good. We could use someone like that right now. Nora finished her coffee and stood. The town was on the edge, but she wouldn't let fear break it. Not if she could help it. The night sky over Nora Whitaker's farm was moonless and silent, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. Hidden in the shadows near the barn, David Harper crouched low, his earpiece crackling softly. Eyes on the tree line, Maggie Turner's voice came through. She was positioned on a ridge overlooking the property, equipped with thermal imaging. They're approaching from the southeast, 5 targets. David signaled to the 2 operatives beside him. Move into position, stay low. Let them come in closer. In the farmhouse, Nora stood at the window, her silhouette blending into the darkness. She could see faint shapes moving beyond the cattle pen's figures, creeping toward her with the stealth of hunters. They carried gasoline cans and what looked like small explosives. The cartel wasn't playing games anymore. They think they're going to scare me off, she muttered to herself. Big mistake. She activated the shortwave radio on the desk. David, they're close. Don't let them get to the barn. Understood, David replied calmly. He switched to a tactical tone. Team Alpha, on my mark. Wait until they cross the second fence. Minutes passed, the tension thick as Nora listened to the faint rustle of footsteps outside. The intruders moved methodically, unaware they were walking into a trap. They've crossed the fence, Maggie's voice confirmed. You're cleared to engage. David gave the signal. His team moved like shadows, emerging from their concealed positions with precision. One of the cartel men stopped suddenly, sensing something was off, but it was too late. Drop your weapons, David shouted, his voice echoing through the night. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the intruders. Panic set in. The men scrambled, some reaching for their guns, others turning to flee. One managed to fire a shot, the sound cracking like thunder. But David's team was faster. A sharp, coordinated response followed 2 warning shots fired into the ground near the attacker's feet. Hands up, now, another operative barked. The cartel men hesitated, eyes wide with fear. They hadn't expected resistance like this, especially not from a farm they assumed belonged to a defenseless old woman. We're not here to kill you, David continued, but you're not leaving without a message. You tell Salazar this land isn't his to take. Understand? One of the men, his hands trembling, nodded quickly. See? We understand. Good, David said coldly. Now get out of here before we change our minds. The cartel men wasted no time. They dropped their supplies and retreated, stumbling over each other in their haste to escape. The sound of engines revving in the distance signaled their full retreat. David exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. Clear, Maggie. Keep eyes on them until they're off the property. Already on it, Maggie replied. They're scattering like scared rabbits. Inside the house, Nora watched the retreat through a pair of binoculars. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. They had underestimated her, and that was going to be their downfall. David entered the house moments later, his boots leaving faint prints on the wooden floor. They're gone, for now. They'll be back, Nora said, her tone matter-of-fact. Men like Salazar don't take defeat lightly. Let them come, David replied. Next time, we'll be ready for more than just a scare. Nora nodded. Good work tonight. But we need to tighten security even further. They'll adapt. We need to stay one step ahead. I've got my team mapping out defensive points, David assured her. We'll set up surveillance and reinforce the weak spots. Perfect, Nora said. She paused for a moment, her gaze turning distant. This isn't just about my land anymore. They're trying to break this town. But they'll learn soon enough we don't break that easily. David smiled slightly. I'm starting to believe that. Outside, the night returned to its eerie calm, but the tension remained. The first battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. Nora knew that each victory would only embolden Salazar to push harder. But she wasn't afraid. She had fought bigger wars than this one and won. The storm was coming, but so was the resistance. Maggie Turner adjusted her headlamp, the beam cutting through the darkness of the underground corridor. The air was stale, thick with the weight of decades-old secrets. Beside her, Agent James Wilson, a tall man with a measured demeanor, studied a crumbling map of the facility that had been pulled from declassified Cold War documents. "This place is bigger than we thought," Wilson remarked, his voice echoing faintly off the concrete walls. "Multiple levels, hidden chambers, and this is just what they've documented. Who knows what else is down here?" "Looks like they didn't want anyone finding out," Maggie replied, her footsteps echoing softly. "That's why the cartel's here. They're not just after Nora's land. They're after whatever's buried under Val Vista." They turned a corner and entered a larger chamber. Rusted equipment and long-forgotten machinery lined the walls. Faded warning signs in both English and Russian hinted at the site's purpose. Maggie ran her gloved fingers over a plaque near the entrance. "Containment Area Alpha." "Containment?" she muttered. "This isn't just a bunker. It's a secure facility." Wilson nodded grimly. "Makes sense. During the Cold War, paranoia was at its peak. Places like this were built to house projects. They couldn't risk being exposed. But what exactly were they containing here?" Maggie scanned the room, her mind racing. It could be anything: experimental technology, classified intelligence, maybe even biological research. Whatever it is, Salazar's people want control over it. Wilson crouched near an old control panel and dusted off the surface. He found a folder of aged, yellowed papers. Most of the text had faded, but a few phrases stood out. "Dimensional integrity protocol and anchor points established." "Dimensional integrity?" Wilson frowned. "This isn't normal military terminology." "No, it's not," Maggie replied. "It's like they were trying to stabilize something. Maybe a tier between dimensions?" Wilson gave her a skeptical look. "You think they were dealing with alternate realities?" "I wouldn't rule anything out," Maggie said. "I've seen stranger things in my line of work." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft vibration from Wilson's radio. He answered it quickly. "Wilson here. Go ahead." "Cartel activity near the south entrance." A voice crackled through. "They've set up surveillance, and more vehicles are arriving. Looks like they're prepping for excavation." "Copy that," Wilson responded, then turned to Maggie. "They're accelerating their plans. We need to figure out what's in this facility before they get too far." Maggie nodded. "Let's move. We need to find the central records room. If there's any documentation on what they were doing here, it'll be there." The two made their way deeper into the complex, their footsteps growing quicker. As they descended another staircase, the atmosphere seemed to shift, an inexplicable sensation, like the walls themselves were subtly vibrating. Maggie paused, pressing her hand against the concrete. "Feel that?" she asked. Wilson stopped and placed his hand on the wall. "It's pulsing, like the place is alive." "Whatever they were stabilizing, it's still active," Maggie said quietly. "If the cartel breaches the wrong section, they might trigger something they don't understand." They entered another chamber, this one filled with data terminals and filing cabinets. Maggie began rifling through the papers while Wilson scanned the digital consoles. "Here," Maggie said, pulling out a sealed file labeled Project Aegis. She opened it and skimmed the contents. "Looks like this facility was designed to protect a unique phenomenon, a convergence point between realities. They created anchors to keep it contained, and Val Vista is one of those anchors." Wilson exhaled slowly. "That explains a lot. If the cartel gains control of this land, they won't just be controlling territory, they could disrupt the entire balance of this phenomenon. We're talking reality itself." "They probably don't even know the full scope," Maggie added. "But once they realize the value, they'll stop at nothing to secure it." Wilson straightened and glanced at the entrance. "We need to alert Nora. She's sitting on one of the most valuable and dangerous pieces of land in the region. And we need to keep this out of both cartel and government hands," Maggie said firmly. "This isn't just about control. If this thing collapses, the entire town could be at risk." They gathered the files and prepared to leave the facility. The stakes had shifted. What had begun as a land dispute was now a battle to protect a secret that could threaten the very fabric of reality. Time was running out, and everyone, including the cartel, was moving closer to uncovering the truth. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. Nora Whitaker flipped through the stack of papers Maggie had delivered that morning. each document bearing the official seal of a development corporation based in Monterrey, Mexico. At first glance, it appeared legitimate business proposals, land assessments, and contracts. But Nora knew better. This wasn't just corporate interest. This was the work of the Neo-Leon cartel. Antonio Martinez, the face of the operation, had been making quiet moves in town for the past week. Unlike Victor El Coyote Salazar's men, who relied on intimidation and brute force, Martinez operated with cold professionalism. His approach was more subtle, but no less dangerous. Instead of sending enforcers to break windows, he sent lawyers to challenge property deeds. Instead of threats, he offered buyouts with enticing terms contracts designed to trap landowners in endless bureaucratic red tape. Nora sighed and leaned back in her chair. Martinez was playing a longer, more calculated game. His cartel didn't just want control through fear. They sought to own the infrastructure, water rights, zoning laws, and permits that could choke the town into submission without firing a single shot. Maggie entered the study, holding a printout of recent financial transactions. I ran the checks on Martinez's development group. They've got shell companies buying up land all across the region. They're also funneling money through local businesses to gain influence. They'll control the entire area within months if we don't act fast. Nora frowned. Salazar was reckless. He underestimated us and paid for it. But Martinez, he's patient. He's building a web we might not be able to untangle if we let him get too far. Exactly, Maggie said. We're dealing with professionals who've learned that lawyers and bankers can be more effective than gunmen. Nora stood and walked to the window, gazing out at her farm. We need to adapt. Our tactics have to change if we want to outmaneuver him. David and his team can handle any direct threats. But this isn't just about muscle anymore. We need allies who understand business law and finance. Agent Wilson is already working on it, Maggie replied. He's bringing in an expert from the DOJ who specializes in organized crime and financial networks. But we'll have to move quickly. Martinez isn't going to wait for us to catch up. Nora nodded. Let him think he's winning for now. The more confident he gets, the easier it'll be to exploit his weaknesses. But we can't afford any missteps. One wrong move, and this entire town could be locked in his grip. The stakes had shifted yet again. The Neo-Leon cartel wasn't here to intimidate, they were here to dominate. And Nora knew that this threat required every ounce of strategy and cunning she possessed. The Val Vista town hall was packed, the tension in the room palpable. Farmers, business owners, and families filled the rows of wooden chairs, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. They had gathered because Nora Whitaker had asked them to something she rarely did. The rumors had spread quickly. The cartel, the government, something buried under the town. People needed answers. Nora stood at the front, leaning on the podium. Despite her age, she radiated a quiet authority. When the murmuring finally died down, she spoke in a calm, steady voice. Many of you know me as just an old woman tending her farm, she began. And for a long time, I was happy to let you think that. But there are things about Val Vista, about all of us, that you deserve to know. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. This town wasn't chosen by chance. Decades ago, during the Cold War, a facility was built beneath our feet. Its purpose wasn't just to protect military secrets, it was designed to stabilize something far more dangerous. Maggie Turner and Agent Wilson stood near the back, quietly observing. Nora continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. Val Vista sits on a convergence point, a place where different versions of reality overlap. The government created a system to anchor reality here, to keep these overlapping dimensions in check. And whether you realize it or not, you're all part of that system. The crowd stirred, whispers breaking out. Some looked skeptical. Others were visibly alarmed. Nora raised her hand for silence. I know it's a lot to take in, but I need you to trust me. The cartel isn't just after land. They want control over this convergence point, and if they succeed, it could tear reality apart. The government may try to intervene, but their solution will be to seal this town off for good. We can't let either side win. How do we stop them? A voice called out from the crowd. By becoming the anchors ourselves, Nora said. Memory is what stabilizes this place. Each of you has memories tied to Val Vista moments that define who you are and what this town means to you. I need you to focus on those memories. Hold on to them like your life depends on it, because it does. Clara Martinez stood up, her expression resolute. You're saying we have to fight for our memories? For the town's history? Yes, Nora replied. Your memories will keep this place grounded. They'll be the barrier that protects us from both the cartel and the government. It won't be easy. Some of you may feel changes like parts of your past are fading, but together, we can preserve what matters most. A heavy silence followed her words. Slowly, people began nodding, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Sheriff Foster rose from his seat. I've seen what the cartel is capable of, he said. If Nora says this is what we need to do, then I'm with her. Others voiced their agreement, one by one. The fear in the room began to shift into something stronger determination. Nora felt a swell of pride, but also a deep sadness. She knew what this would cost them. Each person would have to sacrifice a part of themselves to maintain the stability of their world. And for her, the burden would be even greater. This isn't just about survival, she said softly. It's about protecting the future for your children, for those who come after us. Together, we'll be the foundation that holds reality in place. The town had made its choice. The final battle was approaching, and Nora knew that whatever happened next, Val Vista would endure. The stillness of the night was shattered by the distant rumble of engines. From her vantage point in the farmhouse, Nora Whitaker watched as a convoy of SUVs and trucks crested the hill, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. This was it, the final push from the cartel. They're coming in fast, Maggie's voice came through the radio. I count at least 15 vehicles. David Harper's calm response followed. Understood. Team Alpha, hold your positions. We let them come as close as possible before engaging. Outside, scattered across the property, Nora's defenders were in place. Armed with tactical gear and night vision equipment, David's team blended seamlessly into the landscape. The townspeople who had chosen to fight stood at strategic points around the farm, ready to defend their home. They think they'll overwhelm us, David said quietly to Nora as he joined her at the window. But they've made a mistake just like Salazar did. Nora nodded, her face calm but resolute. Let's make sure they remember it this time. The cartel convoy split into two groups, one heading toward the main gate, the other circling around toward the fields. Shadows moved between the vehicles as armed men spread out, preparing to advance. Now, David ordered. The first wave of defensive action came without warning. Spotlights flared to life, blinding the cartel operatives. From concealed positions, Nora's team opened fire with precision, forcing the attackers to scatter for cover. Explosions erupted as traps carefully laid by David and his team detonated near key entry points. The night was alive with chaos. Gunfire echoed across the fields, but Nora's defenders held their ground. South fence breached, Maggie reported. They're pushing hard. Reposition Team Bravo, David instructed, his voice steady despite the intensity. Nora remained at the farmhouse, directing the defense alongside David. She monitored the radio chatter, her sharp mind calculating every move. The attackers were skilled, but disorganized. In the face of coordinated resistance, they hadn't expected a unified, well-prepared response. In the midst of the battle, Nora noticed a shift in the atmosphere, something more than the fight itself. The ground seemed to hum faintly beneath her feet, as though the facility's buried power was awakening. Maggie, report on the energy readings, Nora said, her voice cutting through the noise. It's rising, Maggie replied. Whatever's underneath us is reacting to the attack. We're nearing a threshold point. Nora's jaw tightened. This was what she had feared. The convergence point beneath Val Vista was destabilizing. If it collapsed, reality itself could fragment in unpredictable ways. She turned to David. Hold them off for as long as you can, she said. I need to go to the core. David hesitated. Nora, you can't do this alone. I have to, she interrupted firmly. "This is what I was meant for. You keep the fight here. I'll handle the rest." David gave a reluctant nod. "Good luck, Nora." She left the farmhouse and made her way to the hidden entrance leading to the facility below. The vibrations intensified with each step, a reminder of the dangerous power contained within the convergence point. In the central chamber of the underground complex, Nora stood before the massive pulsing structure that seemed both mechanical and organic. Lights flickered erratically as the energy fluctuated. She placed her hand on the surface, closing her eyes. "Anchor points, memory, stability," she whispered, repeating the words she had learned all those years ago. Images flooded her mind, moments from her life in Val Vista, the people she had come to protect, the sacrifices they had all made. She focused on those memories, grounding herself in their significance. Slowly, the core began to stabilize. The vibrations eased, the lights returning to a steady glow. Above ground, the tide of battle was turning. With Nora anchoring the convergence point, the defenders gained new momentum. David and his team pushed the cartel operatives back, forcing them into a chaotic retreat. Vehicles sped away, leaving behind wounded and disoriented men. The assault had failed. As the last gunshots faded into silence, David called over the radio. "The farm is secure. They're retreating." Back in the chamber, Nora opened her eyes. The core was now stable, its energy contained. She knew, however, that her role as the keystone anchor would come with a price. Her connection to the convergence point would bind her to this place in ways few would ever understand. But it was a sacrifice she had accepted long ago. When she emerged from the underground facility, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The townspeople gathered around her, their faces weary but triumphant. Clara stepped forward, offering a small smile. "They're gone," she said. "We did it." Nora nodded. "We did. But the work isn't over. We have to protect what we've built here together." The people of Val Vista understood. They had fought not just for their land, but for something far greater. And with Nora as their anchor, they knew that their town, this fragile point between realities, would endure. Nora Whitaker's battle to protect her farm was more than a fight for land. It was a fight for identity, loyalty, and survival. What would you do to defend your home? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.